Hello, hello, and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. I've got an amazing guest joining me today. It's the great Celeste Headlee. She is one of the all-time faves here on the show, former NPR, former a lot of things. Celeste has written several books. She's just turned in another one. I'm real excited to share my very thoughtful, thought-provoking conversation with Celeste with you today. If you want to get to it, jump to it. That conversation begins at 36 minutes. But first, I've got a whole bunch of headlines and a bit of a clip show for you. And so let's jump into it. And a reminder, tonight, I will host a hangout. It's Thursday night. Looking forward to this one because I will have plenty to throw out to you. And I'm very excited to hear back from you on all of it. If you haven't watched Monday night's hangout, a lot of really good points made by listeners and subscribers, such smart folks listening and contributing, and I am so honored to have you here. We talk to the smartest people we can find, and that tends to curate an audience of curious, intellectually curious folks. So let's get to the news, which I'm sure you're tapped pretty closely into, and the clips. And if you're not, I've got it right here for you every morning, usually by 7 a.m. And I've got to lead today's news headlines with the story continuing to come out, and as a result of the floods in Texas, and now, by the way, in New Mexico too. There's still 173 people missing in Texas. Authorities have confirmed at least 119 deaths across 6 counties, including 59 adults and 36 children. That's as of 8 p.m. or so last night. I'm sure that's going to go up. And then if you go to New Mexico, there was brutal flooding there. Did you see that viral video of a house just floating down a river by another house? At least 3 people killed by historic flash floods now in a New Mexico mountain community that suffered devastating wildfires last year. So wildfires and now the floods. The remote village of Ruidoso, if I'm saying that right, about 180 miles south of Albuquerque. And that's where this happened. So the extreme weather continues, and it's creating all kinds of devastation. And then you've got some pretty poor levels of or leaders in government and policies. And now there's a controversy brewing over what Kristi Noem at Department of Homeland Security did or did not do in terms of stopping recovery potentially. It's wild. It's crazy. It's depressing. It's scary. And we'll continue to discuss it here because it's also, well, happening. We don't want to look away all the time or deny reality. Talk more with Celeste about that in my conversation coming up. The head of CEO of X has stepped down. Linda Yaccarino is her name. What a slow-moving fiasco that's been at the Nazi-run and led Twitter, whose AI for a moment went all Hitler yesterday. Her announcement follows a series of unflattering news stories about her boss and about X, most recently focused on Grok, the AI chatbot commissioned for the site, which has been spewing anti-Semitic misinformation since its code was updated last week. Who updated the code with the Nazi stuff? Can we find that guy? I think it's the guy running the company. All right, well, list this under an underappreciated diplomatic debacle, says Steve Bannon at Maddow blog. The Trump administration's top diplomat, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's a complete hollow barrel. He was overseeing a deal to free several Americans and dozens of political prisoners held in Venezuela in exchange for sending home about 250 Venezuelan migrants the United States had deported to El Salvador, apparently. But the deal never happened. Why? Well, part of the reason is apparently because President Trump's envoy to Venezuela was working on his own deal, one with terms that Venezuela deemed more attractive. Do you understand why that's a huge problem? You can't have 2 different representatives working for the same thing separately with separate deals. You can't run a company. You couldn't run a Cub Scouts group if you were trying to get that done. I mean, it's wild. It's crazy that happened. You can read more about that story at the New York Times. It's titled, U.S. Botched a Deal to Swap Venezuelans Held in El Salvador for Americans. I highly recommend that. Great reporting on that, and very important, dare I say. Nobody likes to shit on the New York Times, and they should, and so does Celeste in today's conversation, no doubt. But I'm going to continue to have the most nuanced take that I can in terms of some of these stories. Without the New York Times, where would they be appearing? Who is sourcing the 3 journalists whose names are bylines here? More, actually. And reporting from Bogota, reporting from Florida, reporting from Washington. So I see it a lot more nuanced to all of these things. It's easy to criticize, and we should criticize corporate media the way that Celeste does, the way that Jeff Jarvis does. But I just want to give a little bit more nuance and give a little bit more credit, or give some to some of the great journalists doing work that if they weren't doing it, who would? Okay. Apparently it's possible for a democracy to hold a former president accountable for alleged crimes. How about that? Did you hear what happened in South Korea? A South Korean court early Thursday approved the new arrest of a former president, Yoon Suk-yeol, on charges related to his brief imposition of martial law in December, accepting a special prosecutor's claim that he poses a risk of destroying evidence. How about that? So you can arrest a former president if you're not in America. So, okay. Well, another really important story is that Vladimir Putin, completely undeterred by Donald Trump. Doesn't care that the Trump is getting publicly angry now. He's pushed ahead in Ukraine with renewed intensity despite Trump's sharp criticism of him in recent days. Early yesterday morning, Russian troops launched a record 728 exploding drones and decoys, according to Ukraine's Air Force. The attacks rattled cities and towns across the western half of Ukraine and underscored its need for more weapons. According to the New York Times, Putin is convinced that his country's battlefield superiority is growing and that Ukraine's defenses may collapse in the coming months, according to people close to the Kremlin. They say he views halting the fighting as out of the question without extensive concessions by Ukraine. In fact, analysts say he appears to have already factored in the possibility of new U.S. pressure. Republicans have been working to secure Trump's support for new sanctions on Russia, but it's become clear that Putin is prepared to risk his relationship with Trump in service of what has emerged as his overarching goal over 40 months of full-scale war, Ukraine's capitulation. Wow, that is a wild and crazy situation and story, and the relationship between Putin and Trump and what this all means. And it is, all the best experts seemingly get this one wrong, in my opinion, for a lot of different reasons. But still, I move on to the next headline, because despite a truce, Israel launched a new ground operations in Lebanon. They had a truce with Lebanon after they killed all those Hezbollah leaders or injured them with the exploding pagers. Remember that conflict? Well, despite a truce, there's a new ground operations in Lebanon, so pay attention to what's happening there. Let's come back home, where a federal appeals court has voided Biden-era plans to crack down on tough-to-cancel subscriptions, which would have required businesses to make it easy to cancel subscriptions as it is to sign up for them. Shouldn't that be the way it is? Do conservatives and liberals, do Republicans and Democrats, different folks who subscribe to things, have varying opinions on how hard it should be to cancel subscriptions? I don't think so. I haven't read this ruling, but I don't like it. And they are Trump-appointed judges, and if you want to read more about it, you can read at CNN or just about anywhere else. This CNN piece is titled, "Your Gym's Least Popular Policy Was Just Upheld by 3 Judges. Canceling your gym membership isn't likely to become easier anytime soon." Okay. Well, there's that story. I want to make sure I mention that one because that's probably something that affects you. And I don't know if this is a good idea, but yesterday I do want to mention that it did happen. This is activism. This is action. Roughly 24 scientists stood in the lobby of the Rayburn House office building on Capitol Hill in D.C. for what resembled a science fair, but with a twist, writes Steve Bannon. Instead of students presenting class projects, the event featured leading researchers from across the country standing in front of posters outlining their work and the federal cuts that now threaten it, which I think is a great idea. I love it. NPR has that story. Canceled grants get the spotlight at a Capitol Hill, quote, science fair. And speaking of science, guess what? Just over 6 months into 2025, there have already been more reported measles cases this year than there have been in any other year since the contagious virus was declared eliminated in the U.S. in 2000. Experts fear that the grim milestone is a sign that if childhood vaccination rates do not improve, deadly outbreaks will become the new normal. Wow, yeah. Make measles great again. Measles hits a 25-year high. We did it, America. Thank you. Thank you, MAGA. Thank you, RFK Jr. and all of the white moms who support him. Sorry, white moms. Not you white moms, not you guys listening. Your friends. Talk to them. Apparently, the Secret Service had the former head of the FBI, James Comey. They were following him. Secret Service followed James Comey a day after he posted an image on social media back in May with seashells arranged to read 8647. Trump's critics have used the numerical slang as a way to criticize the president. Trump's allies said it amounted to an assassination threat. The Secret Service also tracked the location of Comey's cell phone as he drove back from vacation. Such tactics are usually reserved for active threats. Yeah, well, I mean, at least you're not James Comey. He's had some public humiliation. He's doing fine, right? He wrote a book and he still seems to have credibility in certain circles. But I guess if they can follow James Comey around, they have enough resources to follow old Comey. The hell's Comey doing? Let's see. Trump administration, of course, also, I'm sure you heard about this. They've taken steps to target not only Comey, but John Brennan, the former CIA director who previously investigated Trump. I think I may have some audio for you on that coming up from Brennan himself, who was on MSNBC talking about it yesterday. In other Trump administration news, our Mad King threatened more tariffs on large and small countries. The EU is hoping to secure a rough draft of a trade deal this week, so we'll see. The Supreme Court justices refused to revive a Florida law that would have let state officials prosecute unauthorized migrants who enter the state. The city's largest public sector union in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, ended a strike that resulted in trash piling up in the streets. So that's good that they got that done in Philadelphia. I was just there, and I got a cheesesteak, and it wasn't that good. Don't go to Gino's. It really wasn't. We really didn't love it. So, life expectancy in California apparently was lower in 2024 than it was in 2019 before the COVID pandemic, according to a new study. I wanted to mention that. Joe Biden's former White House physician refused to answer questions in a Republican-led inquiry into Biden's mental acuity. He pled the fifth. So that happened, and they're going crazy about that in MAGA land and I guess other places. I just don't give a shit. A new study is offering the first estimate of nanoplastic pollution in the ocean. And let me give you a preview. There is a lot. What do human brains, placentas, and dolphin breath have in common? Signs of plastic pollution in the form of tiny particles known as microplastics. Read about it in the New York Times. I've been talking about this one for over a decade, of course. Stop using single-use plastic. Do everything you can to advocate that your community stop using bags and cups, and do everything you can to stop using bags, cups, bottles, and all of the rest. Those tiny toothpicks with the string, I've been known to buy those. Never again. Never again. It's everywhere. It's crazy. And it's wild that that's going to be one of the things that gets us. But here's some good news. Apparently, using apples as a treat has led researchers who study elephants to find that they use a range of gestures that express intentions and wants. So I thought that was a fun story to mention. How elephants say they like them apples is the title of that one at the New York Times. And those are the headlines that I've gathered for you here. If there are more, and there always are, let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Many of you sending me all kinds of stories, guest ideas, and soundbite ideas, as well as compliments and criticism. Send it all to standupwithpete@gmail.com. I really appreciate all of your feedback. Any of your feedback, send it all there, as well as your vitamin N pictures. I got a few of those yesterday. I called for more. I got more, but keep them coming. Get outside and send me your hashtag vitamin N, no man-made objects. That's the only rule, but it means you're getting outside, and I think it helps us stay connected to each other and reality to see these different pictures of nature coming from all over the country and all over the world because people are traveling. So send them in All right, now it's time to get to the clip show, the clips I've gathered for you for today's episode of Stand Up. Let's start with the former CIA director, John Brennan. He was on MSNBC yesterday with Nicole Wallace and weighed in on the news that he and former FBI Director James Comey are reportedly under FBI investigation for alleged false statements to Congress regarding the 2016 intelligence assessment that Russia sought to interfere in that year's election.
My colleague Ken Delaney is reporting that DOJ has essentially confirmed a criminal investigation has been opened or a referral has been made. Do you believe that to be true? And if that's the case, what would the process be for you to be aware of that, made aware of that?
Quite frankly, I don't know what is true. There's so many things that get out into the media bloodstream, and it's interesting that it was, I think, Fox News and Post are reporting things like this. So I don't know whether or not there's any, validity to it. If it was a referral, if there is an investigation, presumably if there is an investigation, that people will be questioned. I would be questioned about it. But again, I've had no contact from them. But again, I testified in front of many, many congressional committees in the House and the Senate over the years. And I continue to explain exactly what we did during this process, why we tried to make sure we stayed true to our intelligence responsibilities and that we were not going to do anything at all to try to interfere in that election. And again, it was a challenging time, but also one I think that the people who actually worked this, both in terms of trying to collect intelligence prior to the election and then the ones who put together the intelligence community assessment, they really, I think, showed the best of what the intelligence community and what CIA is made of. So again, I am clueless about what it is exactly that they may be investigating me for.
Well, there you go. He hasn't seemed to have been notified. Doesn't seem to be too concerned. And it looks like a scare tactic in a way. I mean, who knows? Maybe not. Maybe it's real. Maybe they're really going to launch all kinds of congressional investigations. But if the allegation is that he made false statements regarding the intelligence assessment that Russia sought to interfere in that year's election, I mean, we all knew that. We saw all of the evidence. They shared it already. So I feel like that's a pretty airtight case, but that doesn't matter to MAGA or Trump when he's trying to get revenge against his enemies, because that's the thing that he cares, of course, most about. All right, well, what else do I have for you? How about Tom Tillis? Tom Tillis is the North Carolina senator, Republican, who voted against the big bad bill, who announced that he's not going to run for re-election so he won't be intimidated by Trump and some kind of a primary opponent in North Carolina, but it's helped him grow some balls, apparently, or to just be more honest. And he sat down with CNN's Jake Tapper yesterday, and I wanted to share a little bit of that with you. We got a lot of news attention, the Tom Tillis conversations here. So here's a minute of it.
And I've probably done it more than many. Every time I'm very frank with him, but he has never been untoward, never raised his voice.
He just goes on social media and does it.
Yeah, well, that's the first time he ever did. And so after he did that, after I told the president that he's clearly got the votes, that I will try and work to get something done in the House. He didn't need my vote. And that I would be respectful and quiet and try to do my work on the House side. And then I got that text that I texted him, or I saw I'd never read it, but I saw like the first sentence. I told the president in another text, I said, now it's time to start looking for my replacement because I don't deal with that kind of bullshit.
Mm-hmm. And what did he say to that?
He texted back, I am, and I think subsequent to that, he started taking interviews. He needs to, because it's going to be a tough race in North Carolina. We got to get a good candidate, and I'm committed to helping the president get that candidate elected. If it's not, let's say, a handful of people that will never make it in a general election in North Carolina.
Well, he didn't want to say. I think he meant the black Nazi. So I think he might have been talking about the black Nazi. That guy's awful, by the way, Tom Tillis. I give him zero credit for his newfound courage to vote against that bill, based just on what he said there. He gets nothing. He gets nothing from us. He gets no flowers. He gets nothing. And that's all I want to say about Tom Tillis. And especially because one more clip from that interview, especially because he supported RFK Jr. to be Health and Human Services Secretary, and here's why.
What about RFK Jr.? Because he's obviously gone back on a lot of the promises he made to your colleague, Senator and Dr. Cassidy, about vaccines.
I think that will be something that we'll take up. I defer a lot to Bill Cassidy on that. He's a brilliant man. And I consulted with Bill. Quite honestly, if the main reason I supported Kennedy was because Bill Cassidy thought that we should see how it plays out. And one thing I will say throughout this whole process is I'm thoroughly impressed with Mehmet Oz. I believe that he's quite capable and running a very important part in CMS.
It's crazy. Bill's very smart. He's the only person that mattered to me on this. I wouldn't talk to any other doctors or experts, just Bill. Who I do like is Dr. Oz. I think he's a great cartoon villain, super qualified to be at his position in Health and Human Services. So I mixed a tremendous amount of sense. That guy sucks. Tom Tillis, you fucking suck. Okay. Excuse me. All right. Well, Jamie Raskin had something to say. I like Jamie Raskin. He was on MSNBC with Chris Hayes last night, and they were talking about the Epstein files, and I like this.
Right. Well, look, they've been promoting some wild conspiracy theories about what's on there. We don't know what's true and what's not true. And if there's nothing to implicate Donald Trump, then release the files. What's the problem with releasing them? That's what they've been demanding.
Yeah, makes sense, right? Just release the files. Let's see what's in there. Why can't we have them? It would make sense, right? Here's Jasmine Crockett with a 7-second soundbite that I love.
Ultimately had to get over it. If there's anyone that I am concerned about their mental acuity, it is the current occupant.
Yeah, they played that on Fox News last night because they were going after her because they love to, but I love it, and I'm glad that they did, and keep it going. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She's always great. According to 4 officials inside FEMA, a new rule that any expected expenditure over $100,000 needed to sign off from Kristi Noem slowed the federal response out in Texas. Sources tell CNN FEMA's deployment of urban search and rescue teams, which are typically deployed in anticipation they might be needed, instead was delayed until Monday, 3 days after the flood. Here's CNN's Anderson Coop on the case.
So according to 4 officials inside FEMA, that federal response may not have been as fast as it might have been. They say that a new rule that any expenditure over $100,000 needed sign-off from Secretary Noem slowed the federal response. These sources tell us that FEMA's deployment of urban search and rescue teams, which are typically deployed in anticipation they might be needed, instead was delayed until Monday, 3 days after the flood. Now, a source also tells us that a request Texas made for FEMA aerial imagery to aid in the search was also delayed, waiting for Secretary Noem's approval. Now, additionally, multiple FEMA officials say that they were taken aback by the agency's relatively limited response in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. CNN has reached out to FEMA for comment. So far, no reply from the agency. However, a DHS spokeswoman more generally told CNN that FEMA is, in her words, quote, shifting from bloated D.C.-centric dead weight to a lean, deployable disaster force that empowers state actors to provide relief for their citizens.
Oh, okay. I don't think it's working. I don't know. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is it working? The lean force now? It's faster. Now that it needs the control of the Secretary of Homeland Security's signature on every single thing that they do, apparently. Yeah, that should speed it right the fuck up. Whoo-wee. This time we're living in. These people are nuts. All right, well, yesterday there was great embarrassment for all Americans at the White House because he had a whole bunch of African leaders joining him. And I'm not going to play the audio for you, but he invited 5 African leaders to the White House yesterday, beginning a 3-day summit because of, quote, commercial opportunities. The leaders from Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mauritania, and Senegal, all countries with small populations and economies. And the meetings are expected to concentrate on our Mad King's trade, not aid policy, with all of them facing 10% tariffs on goods exported to the U.S., they may be hoping to do deals to negotiate this rate down. Well, during a televised lunch at the White House on Wednesday, the African leaders lavished Trump with praise while encouraging U.S. economic partnership, because that's all they really can do is lavish praise. I mean, what else can they do for this guy? The entire world knows that Trump is a corrupt, egomaniacal man-child who can be bought or flattered into doing what they want or need. How embarrassing for the U.S., wrote Mehdi Hassan on social media yesterday. By the way, here is Jared Moskowitz on the Midas Touch Network yesterday talking about sounding the alarm for months that cuts to FEMA and the National Weather Service could have severe consequences on emergency management. Here he is talking more about it yesterday.
Here's what I will say. Okay, there have been dramatic cuts to the National Weather Service. There's been dramatic cuts to FEMA. The president talks about a lot of talent at the agency. A lot of talent is gone. They were forced to leave by Elon Musk and Doge and by the administration. So look, at this juncture, it's unclear whether we can do a one-to-one connection, say those cuts led to the failed response here or the lack of response here. But we can agree that it didn't help. Cutting the Weather Service didn't help this situation. Cutting FEMA didn't help this situation. My region, Region 4 for FEMA, which is Florida, we currently do not have a regional FEMA administrator because that person was forced to retire. We have a current FEMA administrator who has zero disaster experience, let alone any flood experience. And so, listen, we're going to have to examine when the first alerts went out, which were on Thursday, talking about 5 to 7 inches of rain. Then we're going to have to look at the alerts that went out on Friday, starting at 1 a.m, right? And then elevating at 3:30 in the morning, telling people now to move to higher ground. Okay. And then at 4 o'clock, talking about how much rain was falling 4 a.m. on Friday. And then at 7 o'clock in the morning is when they were doing evacuations. There is a lot of time gap there.
All right, there you go. Jared Moskowitz yesterday talking about this. You know, he's going to be on top of it, as well as other Democrats who investigate such things on certain committees, including the Oversight Committee where he sits. So I thought that was interesting and important to share. Although here's something I want to give you on economics. This is Justin Wolfers talking about the misunderstanding of economics that led someone to tax Americans and destabilize the global economy with great confidence and zero homework. I love this dude.
Part of Trump's announced strategy, it seems, is to balance out trade deficits with countries, or at least one aspect of this, balance out deficits with countries where we have one. But is there a legitimate economic future to negotiating through tariffs here, whether it's by the August deadline or if that one ends up moving too?
Yeah, so the underlying rationale for this is really quite extraordinary. The large tariffs are going on nations from whom the United States buys a lot, and they don't buy a lot of our stuff. In Trump's mind, that's being ripped off. But here's the thing to understand. In my local economy, I go to my local Trader Joe's all the time. I buy a lot from them. And on the way out, I say, hey, would you like to buy some economics lectures from me? Trader Joe's never says yes. So I buy a lot from them. They buy nothing from me. I have a massive trade deficit with Trader Joe's, but I guarantee you what won't help it is if I impose an extra tax on myself every time I go to Trader Joe's. And that's what a tariff is.
Unbelievably well explained. I love that guy, Justin Wolfers. So good. All right. Here's Adam Schiff, who had a great floor speech yesterday that I wanted to share with you. He's a senator from California, and he laid out the top 10 ways Trump is wrecking the country, and this is good stuff.
Mr. President, over the last 250 years, this country has grown from a handful of rebellious colonies to an economic, scientific, military, cultural, technological, and agricultural behemoth. And crucially, through it all, we have remained a democracy devoted to the hard work our founders envisioned of making our nation a more perfect union. Progress has not always been straightforward, but it has been consistent over time and nothing short of extraordinary, which is why it is all the more heartbreaking to see so much damage, so much self-inflicted harm imposed on our country by this administration over the last 170 days. Indeed, if you were to design a presidency and policies to diminish our scientific and technological prowess from within, it would look a lot like this administration. If you were determined to kill our clean energy future and retreat from any hope of addressing climate change, it would look a lot like this. If you wanted to undermine our standing around the world, befriend dictatorships, and betray our fellow democracies, it would look a lot like this. If you wanted to deliberately tear at the social fabric and cohesion of our country, set state against state and people against people to the point of conflict in the streets, it would look a lot like this administration. The president and his cabinet have been tearing down so much of what makes this country special, and so quickly that it has been hard to see the big picture, hard to separate the biggest harms from merely the most sensational or the most proximate. 100 days was not enough time to evaluate the harms this administration had already inflicted on our country and its people, but 170 days just might be sufficient. So today I want to go through the top 10 ways this administration has been wrecking the country, from the thoughtless and irresponsible, to the illegal and unconstitutional, to the deliberately cruel and malicious. I want to tell you what the actions of this presidency have really meant for the country and for our future. So here they are, the top 10 ways the administration is wrecking the country.
And then he goes on to list them. At number 10, attacking our research universities, dismantling a partnership with the federal government that powered innovation in our economy. Number 9, cutting food for hungry families, eviscerating SNAP to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. 8, weakening our alliances around the world, distancing ourselves from fellow democracies, embracing dictatorships. 7, destroying our renewable energy future and handing global leadership of the industry to China, retreating from any hope of addressing climate change. Number 6, making deep cuts to health and science research and cutting NIH in half. Number 5, doging essential government services, cutting Social Security access for seniors, losing firefighters at the start of the first fire season, crippling NASA and USAID, breaking up the Department of Education, selling off our kids' future. Number 4, doing grave and self-inflicted harm to our economy with nonsensical tariffs, causing friends and allies to boycott American goods, forcing everyday Americans to pay the price with higher prices at the grocery store, Walmart, and Amazon. Number 3, stripping away health care for millions of Americans. Number 2, Trump's endless attacks on the rule of law. Number 1, Donald Trump has assailed the very idea of America. America began as an improbable experiment in self-governance founded upon the, well, he goes on from there. I thought I would read them because he talks about each one of these for several minutes. You can listen or watch at Sen Adam Schiff on Twitter, but you can also just go to his website and learn more. Okay, well, let me do one more clip for you. Let's go to the great Trey Crowder. We always love Trey Crowder of the liberal redneck fame, and here he is with one of his car rants, which I love so much, breaking down the wild week that MAGA has had.
Well, a lot happened this week. First, the horrible flooding in Texas, about which both sides have their arguments. You know, on the left, they say, is it possible these catastrophes are happening more often, at least partly because of our insistence on violently sodomizing the environment, and further, that reckless cuts to the government can only serve to make us less equipped to deal with them? And on the right, they said, what kind of woke bullshit is that? Obviously, the Jews used their secret weather machine to flood Texas and make Trump look bad. Idiot. So it's tough to know who to believe there, you know. I mean, it's hard to say with certainty that Trump's policies directly contributed to this situation. But, I mean, when scientists have warned us for years that things like this would happen more and more, and meteorologists have warned us for months that Trump's cuts would make it harder for us to handle them when they do, then, I mean, it's like they say, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it's probably evil Jew magic, according to Marjorie Taylor Greene anyway. And speaking of eschewing the inconvenience of reality in favor of the warm embrace of fanciful anti-Semitism, this week Elon accidentally turned his AI into a robo-Nazi, so that's fun. For a while now, right-wing thought leaders like Cat Turd have complained that Grok was compromised by wokeness due to the chatbot's annoying habit of saying things that were true. So finally, Elon stepped in and said, we've reprogrammed Grok to ignore any inherently liberal inputs like well-sourced journalism, and he should now more accurately reflect our modern conservative values. Then, like 3 hours later, Grok was heiling Hitler and fantasizing about sodomizing dissenters. I'd say they nailed it. That wasn't the only comically over-the-top illustration of how wrong and dumb MAGA is about stuff that we got this week. For years now, MAGA has told us that Daddy Trump was going to blow the Epstein thing wide open, finally expose the Clinton-led cabal of shadowy liberal elite pedophiles and bring them to justice once and for all. And we all said, probably not. I mean, you've seen how much Trump pops up in the flight logs and pictures of Epstein. He's like the Where's Waldo of perverts. And they said, well, I don't like that, and so it's not real. And then this week, Trump's DOJ came out and said, it's over, he killed himself, there's no list, there's nothing to see here. And Trump is treating the whole thing like Ted Cruz treats a Texas tragedy, just staying as far away from it as possible. Who'd have thunk it? Me. I'd have thunk it. Y'all to thunk it. Basically, anybody who thinks probably would have thunk it. But MAGA, though, they're reeling from this, and I'm not saying they're wrong about there being more to the Epstein thing. I'm sure there is. It's just the idea that Donald Trump was ever going to do anything about it, rather than being an active participant, was asinine. It's just another example of the universe slapping MAGA across the face and screaming at them to wake up to what's actually happening here. But, alas, being woke is gay. They so prefer the comfort of their shared dream world, and that would be totally fine if the forces who operate their little MAGA matrix weren't burning the real world down in the process, but they are, and so on we fight. Love y'all.
All right, there he goes. Trey Crowder, love y'all. Love him. And that's it. That's all I've got for you on the clip show and the headlines, the A block and the B block. Now it's time to get to the C block and main event, my conversation with Celeste Headlee. And I am very happy to have her back. And thank you very much to Kim Nyborg, who reached out yesterday, longtime listener Kim in Iowa, and said how much she loves Sam Youngman, but said that she also really loves Chrissy Greer and Celeste Headlee, and that they are three of her top, not always regulars, or however she phrased it. But she then talked about how much she loves Celeste's book, We Need to Talk, and that she's recommended it to friends. And I just love the feedback, Kim, and appreciate it. I shared it with Celeste. At the opening of this interview, which was live on YouTube, there was some kind of problem with my mixer and mic. And so I had to edit off the first, I think, 5 to 10 minutes of it. I'm not sure exactly how much. It was actually an editing nightmare, which is partially why I'm a little later than I wanted to be this morning. And the show isn't quite as robust as I had planned, but I didn't even need to tell you any of that. I could have just thrown the interview. But I like to be transparent here and bring you behind the scenes production of the show. And also it meant that my mic I had to use a different alternative audio source, which just doesn't, I don't know if you can notice that, but it doesn't sound as good. But anyway, go get Celeste's books. Go follow her on Instagram and Blue Sky. We had, I thought, a really thoughtful conversation and back and forth, and she pushed back on me and me on her when we talk about media and journalism and how things could be better in both and all of it. And I just thought it was great. And she's so smart and so thoughtful, and I always love talking to her. She is one of my favorites, too. So now it's time to get to my conversation with Celeste Headlee, none of which I could do without you, everybody. Please sign up at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. If you like this, you can always pay more. But now let's get to my conversation with Celeste, which picks up with, I had just asked her the question about what's going on with these mass deportation raids and performative raids out, and specifically in California where she grew up. And so here is her answer to that, is where we start.
I assume you're talking about the ICE raids and the use of deployment of not just ICE, but National Guards soldiers on the streets of Los Angeles, what we saw in MacArthur Park. And now Mayor Karen Bass said that there was actually a camp of young people, children, in MacArthur Park that they had to rush to get them away so they didn't have to see and be traumatized by watching interactions between ICE and regular American citizens. You know, I'm a Californian. I was born in LA County. I grew up straddling 1 foot in Orange County, 1 foot in Los Angeles. And they've picked the wrong place. If this was the strategy, was to show that California and especially Los Angeles and Hollywood are really typical punching bags for the right-wing extremists and conservatives, because they like to show how weird they are, how outside they are of the normal. But much like New York, Californians are pretty protective of the things that they work so hard to build and their own community. And it's a large enough community that they can feel a sense of belonging among each other. Again, very much like New York. So they've chosen the wrong place for this. It would have been better to go somewhere else if this is what they were trying to do, that they could intimidate a population, that they can cow a population through a show of force. We've also seen videos of people in Los Angeles literally driving ICE agents back into the building where they were taking shelter. It's just is the wrong place. And that doesn't mean I'm not trying to diminish the suffering of Californians who are being dragged off and never heard from again. I would like to point out how quickly the idea that they were only going to deport criminals went straight out the window. I mean, that left the conversation almost as soon as the inauguration occurred, right? And not a single blink of the eyes. And now they sit there saying they're going to go after citizens. Like the fact that this is happening and that people are mostly, not outraged by this. I don't know how you feel about this, Pete, but the number of things completely outrageous, unacceptable, like this means war, all lowercase letters, type of incidents that are occurring that people are just like blithely moving on from. I saw a post on Blue Sky from a guy who said, how upsetting it is that there has not been a mass exodus from Twitter after the anti-Semitic rant that Grok went on. Right. And he felt that there was a betrayal, especially in this world in which people are using anti-Semitism as a justification for all kinds of fascist acts. And I feel that way about a lot of things. Like there are so many things that should have been the line in the sand. Right. And we've just walked right over them. I mean, how do you feel about that? Like these things that, honestly, as a journalist, if you had told me some of these things that are happening, if 5 years ago you had said, oh, this is what's going to happen, I would have been like, that's ridiculous. Come on, don't be alarmist. But here we are.
I feel that in general, most Americans continue to be apathetic and aren't necessarily engaged, that we are a country of very self-interested people. And while we're horrified to watch this, unless it's directly affecting our bottom line, our health, our current state of happiness, then people they look at it and go, that's terrible, and I'll do whatever I can. And this is sad to see, but for me, I'm going on vacation. Life is pretty good. I still have my health insurance, my job, my kids are going to college. I often think about all these great quotes from civil rights leaders, particularly Dr. King, about silence and those that we, all those specific quotes about, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but that's why I certainly am motivated starting there, but but that's what I think. People are self-interested until it affects them. Then they don't necessarily get out in the streets or necessarily do things to change. What do you think of that self-interest argument?
I think
comfort.
That's true. Now, I'm going to give most people a little bit of a caveat here, a little bit of comfort to take, which is that there's a few things going on. Number one, the American economy has been built literally from the beginning. The founding fathers built in a preference for wealthy people. It's baked into the Constitution. And a lot of people talk about how corporations suddenly became people, right? But actually, the Supreme Court has given corporations the same rights as people going back to just after Reconstruction. when they started saying that the 14th Amendment referred to corporations. So I just want to say that our society is built in a way that puts everybody into fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
Everyone is in crisis or on the edge of crisis all the time, right? Even if you're secure, it would not take too much disruption to make you very insecure. So that's number one. It is extremely difficult to stretch your compassion and stretch your empathy for other people when you yourself are in need of it. The other thing is that they are flooding the zone. There are so many horrible things happening on so many different levels and in so many different areas. You start to become inured because that's what self-preservation looks like. And especially if you are somebody who feels deeply, the emotional tax that comes from, again, stretching your compassion out for every single person who's suffering can be debilitating. And there's a certain amount of self-preservation involved in compartmentalizing.
Yes.
Quite frankly, I feel like as a journalist, I'm really grateful for the training I got in compartmentalization. The training that allows me to report on disasters, to visit tragedies, yet still be able to go to dinner and eat a baked potato or whatever. That's serving me well right now. So I just want to give people a little bit of a pass here. But what comes along with this is that our toleration of this situation. We should not tolerate a society in which over 90% of us are unable to be compassionate because we're constantly in crisis. That's not acceptable. And that's what we should be working on. We should see ourselves and we should look at ourselves and say, I cannot bring myself to read one more account of suffering. I cannot yet again go watch this video of ICE agents, pulling an old man to the ground, right? I forgive you for that, but I don't forgive you if the next step isn't how do I change the system so that I am actually able to show compassion for others.
Your voice and the way that you use it just here in this conversation is really wonderful, and I appreciate your passion and sensitivity and your wisdom based on your experience and understanding of history and your experience as a journalist. So just want to acknowledge that. But I now want to move on to asking you about the journalism of the day. You've seen it all. You've done it all. Print, TV, radio, internet, all of it. And we're in this new world with all its caveats, the good and the bad. How do you know who's reliable, or what do you want to talk about in terms of that journalism or media trends are getting wrong? You're always good to talk about and reframe with language as well as kind of historical references that you're making here. And you're talking about how we shouldn't be buying into the government's propaganda around Alligator Alley and things like that. We should be referring to what it really is. So talk to me about media, journalism, criticism, and specifically how some things are being discussed. Anything you want to choose there?
Yeah. So, let's start first with why you have major news media referring to the legislation as big, beautiful bill, right? Now, the justification always is, well, that's what they called it. But if they had called it the N-word, you wouldn't use that word, regardless of what name they put on there, right? So it's possible for you to refer to something other than its official name when you realize that its official name is unacceptable. I think that repeating propaganda is unacceptable. And you and I have talked about this before. Like, I spent 2 years studying how journalists aid in the spread of propaganda and misinformation. And again, I hate to go on and on about experts, but there are people who devote their lives to studying this. One of the things I just posted this morning was that the beauty of science is that every scientific breakthrough began with someone admitting they were wrong.
Right. I saw that post. Yeah.
They don't know something, right? It begins with intellectual humility. And it's the same thing with misinformation and propaganda. We haven't had this moment when especially our elite journalists are willing to admit they were wrong. You know, we had this huge breakdown in journalistic confidence after the Iraq War because we were so effing wrong, right? But we didn't come away with a massive change because we were never able to admit it, right? We said we were lied to. We were manipulated, right? We wrongly trusted in the officials. Well, you shouldn't have anyway. You should always be, we should be the most skeptical people out there. And we're the ones who see the sausage being made, so we know every politician is full of crap, right? We haven't had that reckoning. And this is why you have credible journalists using the name Alligator Alcatraz. That is ridiculous. And the kind of callousness it shows towards human life is unacceptable. Call it the Dade County facility or whatever. Fine. Tie it to Florida. But don't give it this name that is intolerable and should not appear on any credible news organization's page or video or whatever. This also goes with the crap that the New York Times has been spilling about Mamdani, the New York City mayoral candidate. I don't live in New York. I'm not going to be voting. I got no dog in this race. But I will say that the things that they protected the private information of white supremacists when there was a hack and they were sent information about white supremacists like Christopher Rufo. And they said, that's in interest of privacy. Even white supremacists deserve privacy. And yet they get hacked information about something that somebody filed, an application they filed when they were still a teenager, and they just, the next day, front page news. This double standard, it's unacceptable. And if you cannot justify what you're doing, if you are called to account and you cannot account for your reporting, then you need to retract it and admit a mistake. And that's what they're not capable of doing.
Where else are you seeing that the reporting that you think needs to be retracted, whether it be the Times or anywhere else? What do you think of Jake Tapper and his reporting about Joe Biden's health, this book he wrote? I mean, do you think that journalists missed the boat on that, should have done a better job at reporting Biden's health, and that talking about it now is...
I mean, I went back when Jake Tapper's book came out, and I went back to see if there had been a lot of reporting about Biden's health. And guess what? There was.
Yeah.
There was a lot of reporting about Biden's health.
There was. Yeah.
There was no missed story there. People didn't drop the ball. If you want to find reporting about Joe Biden's health or his age or references to his age, it's constant. Even when he was vice president, there were constant referrals to his age and his mess-ups and his slip-ups. I've been in this business long enough to remember those jokes.
Yeah.
So Jake Tapper is not some intrepid reporter bringing up a story nobody's talking about. He's trying to make money off I assume he thought strategically and thought, okay, this book about Joe Biden is too old. How old is he? Is going to appeal to not only Republicans who hate Joe Biden, but also the Democrats who were angry at him for running again and staying in the race. Like maybe it was that strategic of a position. And of course, his network is all in for him. It's about money. This is not about being some kind of courageous reporter. I mean, some of the people doing some of the best reporting are places like ProPublica, places like, some of the local places, the Texas Tribune, some of these other places that are really doing stories that aren't being heard everywhere. Let me ask you something. How likely do you think it is, out of all the millions of possible stories that are important enough to affect people on a national level? Because there are, and any day, there are at least thousands of those stories, right? So out of thousands of these stories that are candidates, how likely do you think it actually is that the mainstream media, I'm talking about Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, LA Times, NPR, let me not leave them out, the cable news, how likely is it that all of them agree on which are the top 10 stories?
Highly unlikely?
Really unlikely. And yet that's what happens every single day. Somehow, out of all the thousands of possible stories they could cover as headline news, all of them agree. And I think we as journalists need to ask ourselves some pretty tough questions about why that is. We're not calling each other. We're not calling each other and saying, hey, what are you doing for headlines? It's because I want to copy it. So A, how is it happening? And B, why?
My defense of media, including mainstream, corporate, whatever, is they have to make money to pay the journalists. And the way to do that is to get people to read their stuff. And to get people to read the stuff, you got to talk about the things people care about. And you've got to be the tastemakers of what those things necessarily should be. And so how do we exist? How do we continue to fund any enterprise in journalism by covering what should be the most important stories, but might not be? I think the best example of that is, for me, is, well, this is not exactly what I'm talking about, but like, I don't care at all about P. Diddy, and that story should not have been covered in your 1 hour of television at all, much less be resourced with a reporter on the scene baking in the heat all day for some kind of a tidbit so they can go live and say breaking news banner. That's bullshit. But what about all of the rest of the important work that they are doing at NPR or New York Times, Washington Post, CNN? A lot of those stories are really important and resourced, but they still have to get people to click on them. They still have to get people to subscribe and sell what is left of ad revenue. How do you find the nuance in paying journalists and keeping people interested? Did that make any sense? Are you going to thump me right now?
So I am going to thump you. Yes.
Of course.
But first, let me just say that
Hit me as hard as you want.
I've been very open about the fact that I do not think journalism should be a for-profit enterprise, ever, under any circumstances. It's the only industry explicitly protected in the Constitution, and that's for a reason. It is a public service, and it should not be about profit, number one. But number two, the argument that you're using is essentially the same argument that the New York Times used to defend their reporting, their irresponsible reporting on Mamdani. They basically said, look, this generated a lot of engagement, and it started a really engaging conversation. And so it was worth covering. Do you agree with that?
Do I agree with that it's worth covering because it generates engagement? No, I think two things have to be true. It has to both generate engagement and be in the public's interest.
See, and there's the thing.
Because otherwise no one's reading.
I think there's all kinds of engaging stories that people would be interested in that are not being covered while people are writing 18 million stories about P. Diddy. I actually don't have a problem with covering P. Diddy because you can do that in a responsible way. Maybe you could talk to somebody who is an expert on prosecuting domestic abusers. You could have a really interesting conversation about sex trafficking. Like, you could use that as the linchpin for a really interesting conversation about issues that affect a lot of people. But that doesn't need to be the headline in every single major news organization in the country. Because when you do that, when everyone's duplicating one another and they're sending their very expensive and experienced journalist out to cover the same goddamn story every day, they are not covering a lot of other stories that could be equally engaging and affect the same number of people and deserve top of the fold.
Well, I mean, this is such an important point, and I need to think more about it before I'll try to make one more point, which is what I heard when I heard you say that just now. My sarcasm, my cynicism kicked in and said, I'll give you an example of one of those 1,000 stories that you're talking about. Anything happening at FDA right now, and ProPublica and a lot of other places are doing good work on these things. Anything happening in HHS, anything happening in national parks, anything about this big bad bill, you could dig that apart and have all kinds of interesting stories. What I'm saying is none of them, no matter how sexy you make it, is going to get the kind of clicks that P. Diddy is getting.
I don't think that's true. And I think that the clicks on the engagement on Instagram or TikTok or any of the other videos where very often less informed people are doing stories about, did you know this about, here's an unknown fact about the big, beautiful bill, right? Or
you're breaking your own rule, by the way. You just alligator alleyed.
Oh,
I did. Called it what they want you
correct.
to call it.
You're correct. I was trying to quote an influencer, but yes.
Fair enough. I get it.
But in any case, I did a post on LinkedIn because they just issued a major recall of like over 370,000 units of bacon, which I think had E. coli or something else. Somebody's going to fact check me. And I said, look, here's the number of people who've been fired from the agency. This is going to be really dangerous. Here's a link to the place where you can subscribe to get updates on food recalls, because this is going to become even more important in the days ahead.
Oscar Mayer turkey bacon recalled for Listeria contamination? Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
no.
That maybe if it was 370.
Bacon. There's a few of them. A bacon recall. 360,000 pounds of bacon being recalled due to potential, Listeria.
Yeah. So these are going to become more and more common because they have either riffed or fired or purposely retired a lot of these employees, and the agency was already dangerously understaffed.
Already, yeah.
So this is something that people care about. And you can cover this in a way that's engaging. If you can't cover something like that in a way that's engaging people, where they are like, uh-oh, I better read about this, then that's your failing.
It is your failing. I agree with you, but you're telling me that the turkey bacon recall is as sexy as P. Diddy's sex trafficking, one of the most important, influential hip hop artists.
Okay, now you're putting another standard on it, Pete. Oops. Before you were talking about the fact that it needed to drive engagement.
Yeah.
Now you're saying it also has to be sexy. It doesn't. It's not. It should not be a for-profit enterprise. It doesn't need to be entertainment.
Right.
It needs to be a public service, and it needs to drive engagement, meaning that it has to make the case that this matters to you, and here's why.
Sexy, or it has to be provocative, or it has to create fear, or else people aren't necessarily, the vast majority of people, or it's not cutting through. I mean,
I reject that.
Go ahead, reject it with details.
I reject that as a standard of what makes good journalism or headline journalism. Has to be sexist, provocative, or drive fear?
No, I
reject that.
I reject it. It's good journalism. What I'm saying is, in the reality of the way that we have access to things these days, it would seem that even the most respectable journalists are making catchy thumbnails for their stories when they post them.
Have you ever gone back and read some of the original stories about Watergate? About, even if you go back to some of the original, early 20th century, late 19th century, about the Crédit Mobilier scandal, for example, or some of the other scandals, they were neither sexy. They were provocative to me, but I'm a nerd.
But that's a different, I feel like that's such a different
I'm talking
standard.
But you're adding this standard. This isn't a standard. This is the point of standards, is that they should stand the test of time. And having a standard where we need to be able to, where real journalists need to be able to compete with E! or ESPN. No, these are different things. We need to drive engagement. We need to be of use to people. You need to make the case that what you're reporting on is important, urgent, and matters to that person's life. And if that also drives engagement, then you're doing your job. It doesn't have to be sexy. It doesn't need to drive fear.
I fully agree with all of that. I'm trying to figure out how that is successful enough in today's media atmosphere to employ good people doing great journalism, the way that there always have been, the way that you always have done, and many of your colleagues and many of your mentors.
ProPublica's doing great.
But they're not doing as great as I wish they could and would, especially with,
but they pay their journalists well.
Yeah,
and they're hiring.
But most people, but do you think that as many Americans have even know that ProPublica exists versus some crank on YouTube where they're getting their information from, much less Fox News?
This is, again, a different standard, right? Mm-hmm. You're adding yet another standard here. We're also not measuring the success of journalism based on whether it can compete with TikTok. or with propaganda spreaders or influencers. ProPublica's reporting, I will tell you one thing, almost everybody in America knows about the investigations into Clarence Thomas's conflicts of interest. And you and I both know where that reporting came from. They were featured and named a bunch of times by John Oliver because the reporting was so good, right? Like, that to me is successful journalism. I don't mean to keep hammering on ProPublica. There's many other outlets that are doing. Teen Vogue has been killing it. Frankly, the Rolling Stone magazine has been doing great in their political coverage. So, and driving clicks. The Onion, you know, if you talk to the current CEO of The Onion, he talks a lot about what they're doing and how analog it is and how inefficient their process is. And yet they're doing financially better than ever.
Oh, wow.
And part of that is that they started issuing an actual physical, tangible newspaper again. I get one in the mail every month. So
I had really? Wow. That sounds like a risky call to do going backwards, but if it's working, I love
it's
to
working.
hear it.
I get it delivered every month. I leave it out on my coffee table and people love it.
So let me ask you this question just to move this part of the conversation a little bit further. Jake, don't you think that was leading? Don't you think? Ugh, but I just did that to you. How do we meet people where they're at? Because I think that specifically I'll ask about Gen Z. They don't know about ProPublica. They don't read newspapers. They certainly don't watch CNN or cable news. They overwhelmingly get their information from TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. I would say probably those specific platforms. So how do we meet that group of people where they're at, or any other group of people where they're at?
So first I want to say that research from the American Press Institute says that actually Gen Z and millennials, I mean, millennials are middle-aged now, but still, almost 100%, it's over 95%, consult the news every day. And that's a wide variety of sources. They read actual newspapers, both local and national. They watch cable news, not in the numbers that boomers do, but nobody does. They go to websites, they go to apps, they listen to podcasts, they listen to radio even.
I should have said podcasts, yeah.
Yeah. So I think they found out that on average, that age group gets their news from 6 different traditional sources or social media every week.
You're citing data and I was citing an anecdote, so who wins? I think I did.
Probably in the propaganda war you would. So also we have found that younger people are the millennials, and especially Gen Z, have the highest numbers highest amount of willingness to pay for their news. So they value good news. They're willing to pay for it and support it, and they're reading it. So, you know, it's interesting. I saw this, not to bring it back to TikTok, but I saw yet another upsetting video from this guy named Jarek Lewis that he posted just a few days ago. And he said, I think this idea that the average American is struggling and most people are living paycheck to paycheck, I think all of that is a lie. You can give me all the data you want, but I trust my national instincts. I trust my own eyes over something I can't personally verify. And I thought, see, you're bringing up this danger of getting your news from social media, and that's the danger right there. That's what the danger is. Somebody saying, you can give me all the evidence in the world, but I'm going to continue to believe what it is that I believe.
That
regardless.
brings me to my other peekadillo. Peekadoo? The first one is just how to fight apathy and doing good journalism, responsible journalism in the public's interest is generally how I see things. But the other one is the lack of trust, the eroding trust in experts and institutions, which there's been a lot written about, of course. My whole premise for my show has always been find smart people, find smart people who are good at talking, have them on the show, mostly experts. And I have still the same faith, more faith in experts than I ever have, more faith in research than I ever have, because I know people that do research for a living. So I just ask them about research and then I don't do it. And I know AI is making everybody even smarter, and everybody's an expert and an epidemiologist, as we learned, and so on. But that's my other concern, and the other thing I've thought about my whole career. Fighting apathy, how do you get to people? And then how do you get to people with reliable information now that we've got this erosion in trust in experts and institutions and in government, most importantly, I feel is the biggest concern. And whenever I talk to federal government workers, they say, I think what you already said, that they're underfunded, that they're under-resourced, that they're underpaid, and so on. And then people think they're all just sitting around doing nothing. So what do you...
Mike, you're bringing up a really great point here. I'm so glad that you said this. You know, I just recorded a video a few days ago about the so-called idea of elites. And, you know, it's a classic sign of authoritarianism and fascism to break down trust in experts. But let me just emphasize the exact point that you're making, which is the federal workers, the scientists, the professors, the teachers, they're working class. They're not making a bunch of money. The average salary for a chemist is like, in the United States, is like, I don't know, $50,000, $60,000 a year. Keeping in mind that the median salary for all Americans is like 53, maybe. These are not people making a ton of money. They're not in it because they're not elites. The people telling you to mistrust the experts, those are the elites. The elites are not some guy testing the water in the runoff of your local stream or river. That guy's making working class money. Right? Like, he is as invested in the success of this economy as anybody else, and it's success in the economy for the average American. You know, you have to ask yourself, what does this person get out of it? Right? This is the classic question of all journalists ask, and probably detectives, right? Like, who's got motive? Motive means an opportunity. But I ask myself this question all the time. Like, what do they get out of this? Either way, out of this legislation. And your average so-called elite, your college professor, who's probably still trying to pay off student loans on a salary of $75,000 or whatever, they are invested in the average American getting ahead because they're the average American. But again, you know, I'm not trying to give people a pass except to say that we are all in fight or flight mode. Everybody is in a place of where panic could come at any moment. And so when we are manipulated, when we are inundated with misinformation, with propaganda, and we're already primed, evolutionarily primed, to look for someone to blame, to look for the threat, it is not surprising to me that we fall for these traps. Intellectual humility requires reflection. And we are living in a society in which the actual elites have created a system in which we don't have time for reflection. And that is by design. Even if it's not conscious design, it is at least unconscious design to leave us in a place where we don't have time to think.
So many follow-ups about that, but I know I want to ask you one last thing just to get your take on. It's always what I do when I'm talking to Celeste. It's like a menu of items that I just got to ask you about this. And then not follow up and not stay on that stream necessarily, but ask one more thing. And I got to just, you've covered politics in Congress your whole life, and much of my life I covered it at the POTUS channel at SiriusXM, watched the sausage be made, and certainly covered a lot of different pieces of legislation. And so I want to know how you see the giant piece of legislation that was just... The
2025 budget bill?
Well, whatever they want to call what was just signed by the president. They call it the big, beautiful bill. I call it the worst bill ever. You call it the budget bill. I wonder if you do that because a budget is a moral document and they're showing themselves. But what do you... How do you see this compared to all the other pieces of legislation that have created opportunity or healthcare, access to healthcare, or, you know, deregulated the financial institutions? Like, legislation comes back to haunt us or to make our lives better in many cases and save our lives in many cases. So how do you see this that just happened?
So first, let me just say I'm going to end this on a note of hope. So stay tuned. I'm going to give everyone a little bit of optimism at the end.
Okay.
Here.
All right.
But I will begin by saying this is the worst piece of legislation of my lifetime. And when I say worst, it sounds like I'm giving you my opinion, and I am, but journalists are allowed to be biased in favor of democracy. We're allowed to be biased in favor of fairness and equitable access. And this takes us the other direction. You cannot be a journalist in this country without having seen the absolutely devastating effect that income and wealth inequality has had on our society at every single level. And this takes us so far in the wrong direction. It's disastrous. Now, I will say that the cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, for example, the Republicans built it in so that they're delayed until after the midterms. Now, that was strategic. They didn't want people to lose their health care and blame them before they got into the ballot box and voted for them. And then they'll feel the pain of losing their health care and have family members die to hunger or totally preventable diseases, right?
Right.
But I will also say that because of that, this is a budget bill. And that means you can make a new budget. So if you get a new majority in Congress, if you get a new majority, you can create a new budget. As you said, budgets are moral documents. They tell us our priorities. When you make a budget at home, it tells you what are your priorities? What are you going to spend on, right? And it's the same thing with Congress, that the most devastating cuts. Look, the bill is already going to have awful effects because there are cuts to Medicaid coming. There are hospitals that are going to shut down. There are things that are going to happen immediately that will not wait until after the midterms. But also, we can have a new set of priorities if we have a new Congress. And people really underestimate how effective phone calls to legislators are.
Well, I don't want to rain on your positive note, but you forced my hand. I
forced you to go negative.
You forced me to ask the elephant in the room question, which I have to ask every smart person I talk to, which is pretty much everybody I talk to here on the show at least. How do you feel about the possibility of a free and fair midterm election that could do what you just suggested around reversing these horrible cuts?
I don't know. We don't have free and fair elections at this point. They're not free or fair. I can't think of a time in the United States where we've actually had fully free and fair elections.
Fair enough. Appreciate that.
But, you know, after Obama's election, conservatives in this country did as they have done many, many times in the past, and they tried to restrict voting rights. And they've done that again and again and again many times. Yeah. And they have restricted them to the point where it probably had a big part to play in the re-election of Trump last year. So, but also a huge number of people who are eligible to vote didn't.
Right.
Like, so many. I don't remember the percentage, but it was a lot.
Do you like compulsory voting like Australia has and other countries?
I think you should be already opted in and registered to vote and have to opt out.
Yep.
And I think that we should absolutely set aside a federal holiday so that voting is a holiday and everybody has the day off and you go and vote.
Yep.
I think we should make it as easy and normalized as possible to vote. It is your civic duty. And I know that's not sexy or provocative, but it is. And I would just say that if, after emancipation, the level, and after the 14th Amendment was passed, the voting participation among black men in this country was above 95%. Because that's a people who understood the power of the vote. Right? If we could just get people to understand that the way to fight back against all this corruption and this attempt to limit our freedoms is to exercise them to the most aggressive and enthusiastic way possible, we would not be in the position that we're in.
A lot of great insight on that and everything. Thank you very much for putting up with my technical issues on the sound. Thank you very much for joining me today. I think everybody should go follow you on Instagram because you're doing great work over there. Those videos that you've been making now, I should be watching and asking you about them all the time. So really helpful and important. It's journalism. And we always appreciate you for joining us. One of the greatest, Celeste. Thank you very, very much for doing this with me today. I appreciate it.
Always a joy to talk to you, Pete. Have a good one.
All right, there she goes, Celeste Headlee. Wasn't she great? Sorry again about my mic and tech issues and that we missed a little bit at the top of that interview, but thanks to all who joined live and let me know that I was having a tech issue, or that would have probably been a real clusterfuck. It already was. But I really appreciate your support and listening to that one. Hopefully you learned as much from it as I did, with perspective and insight from one of the best. Go follow her on Instagram, especially, where she's posting all kinds of commentary. Follow Celeste on Instagram. And everything else is regarding Celeste and all my guests linked in the show notes. So go check it out, please. You know, maybe you never do. Maybe you never have. Maybe today's your day, you bumblebees here at the end. Emmy Award, Grammy Award, Tony Award, who won all the awards. Okay, well, he definitely won a Grammy award for Starland Vocal Band and so much of his amazing work. So good. Go buy his new album, John Carroll. We love him. JohnCarroll.org. Go see him live. Go download it. And I will talk to you tonight, hopefully, at the Hangout.